insecure workers in Germany, forced labor in Europe, child labor around the world, and spicy food in China. These are some of the topics I discussed with Federica, who's a real expert in sustainable supply chain. Yeah, really cool that you're here, Federica. You're a real expert in supply chain topics.
Yeah, I'm happy that we're speaking.
There's a lot of legislation coming up right now. Where do you see this going? Do companies already panic, or what's your view on that?
I don't know if panic is the right word, but I would say they're overwhelmed, definitely, and also a bit tired, maybe a bit frustrated, because politicians and politics, they've been changing a lot of things recently. So some companies that I work with, they have started implementing the German Supply Chain Act, and now there's changes where they're not anymore, they don't have to comply anymore with the Supply Chain Act. So they're more like frustrated maybe, rather than panic, I would say.
Yeah, I heard of companies who even hired people for that Supply Chain Act, and now it's, postponed apparently.
Yeah. Exactly. A lot of resources and money and time went into preparing. And so now, especially for CSR or sustainability managers, it's also difficult now to keep the topic interest or up to speed and relevant for others, right? Because other people, CEO or buying manager, they might be saying, well, now we don't care anymore about the topic. So what do you do now?
Yeah, but the topic, of course, didn't go away. I mean, we have these issues within the supply chain.
Exactly. Dogs are with us as well. They're also interested in supply chains.
Yes, supply chain where your food comes from. Yeah. Yeah, so what are the typical issues that you see about the supply chain?
So every supply chain has topics. There's no supply chain where we don't have labor issues or also human rights abuses. So depending on obviously your product, where you source, you have different topics. But, you know, many people, they say, the labor topics, human rights, they're always very far away from us here, thinking about Europe, for instance, but they're right here in Germany, in the UK, in France, in Spain. We have the topics as well.
Where do you see these topics?
We do. I can talk a little bit about my experience as a social auditor in Germany, where I audited production firms and checked labor standards there.
Okay.
So, and you see things that are not, something like minimum wage maybe is not always paid. Or we have the, where people live, the dormitories that are not up to the regulations. Or what I also saw once, which really struck me, is it was a slaughterhouse, and people were driven there in the morning to see if there was work for them to do. So basically how many, because they were paid on the piece, on how many animals they slaughtered. And basically every morning they went there, a couple of workers, and then they said, okay, you have work. You don't have work today. We don't have animals. You go back home.
Okay.
In the middle of Germany. So you can imagine the security for these workers was not there, right? They didn't know, am I going to get paid today or not? So we have stuff, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't expect it in that scale. So, I mean, sometimes you hear about those single cases that might happen, but interesting that you see this really and that you saw it with your own eyes.
Right. And I mean, there's different scales, right? There's also topics that we don't have to worry about as much anymore. For instance, child labor is a topic that we have eliminated really successfully, which other places have not. So then it also depends a little bit. But if we look at forced labor, for instance, that's a topic that's very subtle, right? It means that a person cannot exercise their own will. And this can be very subtle, right? It can also mean from South America, I need a visa to work here. So I might be more vulnerable to accept conditions because of my vulnerability, right? So forced labor is not always like what we picture in our head, that is very dramatic and very visual. It can be very subtle when people feel, in a sense, stuck.
Yes, and do you feel that the companies really care about that more now?
I think so. I think that the German Supply Chain Act, I mean, I can speak more for Germany because that's where my clients are, but definitely the topic has been on the agenda of companies that have not thought about this before. So many companies have been thinking about these topics, but there's a lot of new companies now that are entering this
Thought
discussions,
process,
exactly,
yes.
to say, hey, where do we have maybe topics that we have to look at?
Yes, yeah, of course. I mean, there's a lot of topics to look into for any company, but yeah, this is really serious. I mean, if there is child labor, if there is forced labor, this is nothing which can be taken easy by a company.
Exactly, also thinking about reputation damage, right? And
yeah, we all remember this picture with the football being sewn together by a child.
It's very emotional. It's very. But even if we look at other topics, for instance, discrimination, right? It's again a subtle topic, and when you go into companies, they first say, "We don't have discrimination. You know, we treat everyone the same."
Yeah.
And then once you do training and you teach a little bit also about what is even discrimination, then some say, "Oh, maybe we're not." Maybe we have a topic that we can improve. You know?
Yeah, and often it's not much which needs improving, but it's good that they think about it and that this process starts.
That's true. A lot of it, I think, is about awareness. You know, once you understand these topics a little bit more and you're aware of them, you can spot them, you can identify them, be it with your colleagues or in the supply chain when you're a buyer and you visit a supplier. And you have a bit of knowledge about what could be a situation that's off, then I can get a gut feel like, oh, this supplier actually, I don't feel like things are going the way I would like them to go. And then you can act on that.
And do you see more of the social topics or more of the environmental topics?
Well, I work a lot on the social topics, so my world is definitely about social topics. But obviously, that's also what we always say in sustainability. We need to think things together, right? And if I do a training for buyers on when you visit supplier, what you can look at, then I'm happy to bring in environmental experts that also teach the buyer about the environmental things. So I think we have to look at them together, and then, for instance, they can also intertwine a lot, right? If we look at chemicals, it can be an environmental topic, but it can also be a social topic.
Yeah, because for the workers it's also toxic, not only for the environment. Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And do you see that supply chains are already changing? Is it more safe, let's say, for European companies to buy from European companies, or are they still sourcing worldwide? What do you see there?
I see that some companies are thinking of changing their sourcing strategy, not just now, but also before, especially looking at China, for instance. Some companies feel like maybe in the future they could have disruption, so they're trying to move supply chain somewhere else. And yeah, I think the high amount of regulation that's also there could also spark a company to say, I don't want to fill out all this paperwork. If I source from that region, I might source somewhere else. I cannot really say if it's really happening, but I am pretty sure that people are thinking about it.
Okay, and what would be the best strategy for companies outside of Europe if they still want to sell into Europe with all these legislation coming?
I'm so happy that you mentioned this point, because that's often neglected a little bit. And also we are pushing a lot of our regulation on these suppliers outside of Europe, and they struggle because they don't understand. I mean, we sometimes don't understand our own regulations. So imagine them, right? They get questionnaires, they get a lot of things they have to do. So I feel like they're sometimes also thinking, is this a partner that I
Is it
want
worth
to,
it?
is it worth it, right? Because yes, if you have large buying volume, maybe you want to stay in the relationship, you want to do the extra mile, but I feel like it's getting really a lot for suppliers.
And how could they prepare to be ready? I mean, Europe is still a good market.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of, let's say, local social environmental auditors. You know, audits, they're often kind of pushed, like put in a negative light, I find. But there's a lot of good we can take out of it. And one thing is that there's so many experts going around that can prepare factories or they can work with factories on these topics.
Okay, and if factories set up everything in a perfect way, then they can anyway make the best business everywhere in the world, because I mean, we see legislation coming up everywhere, slowly maybe.
You're right. Yeah, I would also think that if suppliers, if productions are keeping these topics in mind and trying to evolve and implement them, that they would be in a good position later to kind of choose maybe the client that they want to. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I said perfect, but perfect, of course, we discussed it before, is not possible. So there will always be cases where not everything works well. What's the best strategy for these cases?
What do you mean?
So if some company discovers something in their supply chain or in their own company, what would be their best strategy to deal with it?
Again, so there's different ways. Because I've worked with different companies, and the strategy is always different depending on the case and on the supplier relationship you have. So I've been in cases where the supplier was not really willing to change and the buying volume was very little. So even if there was a case, for instance, child labor, they were not willing to solve this issue. This can also happen. But then I also know another case where they were invested both and they said, hey, we have a child labor case, how can we solve this? And then you bring in maybe local experts as well that have an idea of what the child can do. Can the child go to school? Can maybe his salary continue to be paid until he's old enough to work in the company? Is there childcare that we can set up in the factory? You know, then we get into the exciting stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which we want. We want to improve things. We want to get into the useful actions for everyone involved. And so, that's when it gets exciting, but also difficult and challenging.
And are you also supporting these facts or these initiatives?
So I coordinate and I help them. And then I also, when it gets too complicated, when it's about local law, then I have local experts that are also on the case then, or on the, in the project.
And for your personal work, I mean, what's the biggest struggle with all these supply chain topics?
My focus work is on buyers and how I can empower buyers to use their relationship or their time that they have with suppliers to get into really good discussions on these topics and then improve things or make better buying decisions. So my struggle right now, I mean, there's many struggles, but it's about how can we make sustainability and social standards so concrete and relevant for buyers that they are willing to take them with them wherever they go, whatever they do.
Yeah, sounds like a challenge. Yes.
That's why I have white hair already. You know?
Can't see it.
That's good.
Yeah, we have now all the legislation coming up for the supply chain. Some of it is already there, of course. How does it overlap with the CSRD, for example, with reporting activities?
There's a lot of overlap, and even in the CSDDD, if you are falling under the CSRD, you don't have to report on the environmental part of the CSDDD. So there's even like legally already some really strong ties, but also from the requirements as well. obviously in the CSRD, if you've identified workers in the value chain is one of my material topic, then you're going to do what is required in the German Supply Chain Act or the CSDDD.
Okay.
So I would say the CSRD is probably one, like a kind of the strategy, the framework, and then, and it's a lot about reporting, obviously,
Yeah.
but then once you see the light behind the tunnel, then again, you can get into the good stuff, into real action and improvements.
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. If a customer approaches you about their supply chain, how would you usually start a project with them?
So as I said before, I work mostly with buyers because at the buying department, there's a lot of power to change things in the supply chain, right? The buying department is has the relationship to the suppliers. So we would start with a training, with building up knowledge and skills within the purchasing department so that they can include these topics into the buying process, be it when they choose suppliers or when they work with suppliers, when they develop them, or also when they say, hey, I don't want to work with that supplier anymore.
Okay, so basically you're setting up the knowledge that the companies can do everything by themselves. After a while, they wouldn't need too much additional support for everything.
Yeah, so I think working with buyers is kind of a particular thing. There's also, and I have done this in the past, but others are doing this as well, where you really start what they say mapping out your supply chain and also your stakeholders, right?
Okay.
That's usually how you start
Yeah.
to figure out where do I even have risks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, okay. And finding out about those risks, and then you would customize basically a training for the purchasing department. And okay, so they will be able then to be more aware of the topics.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm really a fan of good questions. So I'm teaching buyers to ask very simple questions. So I can share one of them if you want.
Please.
And it comes from a social auditor that I work with in China. And so the question is, do your employees like spicy food?
Why is that a good question?
So why is that a good question? Because, you know, imagine you're a buyer and you visit your supplier in China somewhere. And you're like, hey, it's a very informal question, right? And you say, hey, do your workers like spicy food or not so spicy food? And if the production manager, the CEO of the factory tells you, yeah, they really like spicy food and that's why we have this and this, it shows that he cares about his workers. You know, if he says, I have no clue what they eat, period, right? Then you know, well, maybe, you know, he doesn't care as much about his workers. Because at the end, what is this whole topic about? It's about caring for your workers, right? And making sure they are heard and their interests are respected and you have a good working environment.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I love these really simple, informal questions that everybody can ask. And yet you get, by listening, you get a lot of information.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the answer can be anything except, I don't know, basically.
And it's a little bit what also auditors do, right? We ask questions and we listen and we ask maybe a follow-up question and then we notice, oh, is there a process? Have they thought about this topic? You know, it could be other questions like, how is the hiring process in your company? When they say, well, you know, when they stumble and they don't, then you know, well, maybe it's not such a good process. And if the hiring process is not really good, then there's a risk that maybe children work there because maybe the passport or ID is not checked, you know. So these types of things I like to teach. Yeah.
Yes, sounds good.
Yeah.
Yes, and do you see that supply chains will be changing a lot, or would you say it's probably only slightly and the companies all change? Basically, there's two options. Either the European companies search for different supply chains or their suppliers change the way they do their business complying with everything that is asked for.
I think that we can do a lot of things by adapting those little, by training buyers or by doing, audits or by doing trainings or by thinking about our risks. I think we probably won't change, revolutionize the supply chains, but I do believe that by little things we can change and improve things for at the end workers, right? That's what the social part is about. So yeah, I'm hopeful on that we have some leverage and some influence, some impact.
Yeah. And it would also be good if not only trading within Europe is possible, but if it stays like global trading opportunities. It should not be the result that global
we
trading
shut ourselves off and become.
Yes.
I would agree with you.
Yeah, cool. I think that was a good finishing word for this interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a good discussion. I enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. Me too.
The dogs too.
Yes, the dogs are doing great.